A senior flight attendant, the polished face of a billion-dollar airline, sees an old, battered suitcase. It's scuffed, taped at the corners, an antique from a bygone era. She sees the quiet, unassuming black woman carrying it and decides to make her the target of a cruel, public joke. What this flight attendant doesn't know is that the woman she's mocking isn't just another passenger on a discount ticket. She is the architect of the very standards the attendant is so spectacularly violating, the unseen force who holds the fate of the entire airline and thousands of jobs in her hands. A single act of prejudice is about to ground a high-flying career forever. The air in the Orion Air first-class Solstice Lounge at JFK was a carefully curated symphony of privilege. It smelled of expensive leather, freshly brewed espresso, and the faint, citrusy tang of complimentary gin and tonics. Low, melodic jazz notes drifted from hidden speakers, a soundtrack for the quiet clacking of laptops and the hushed, important-sounding conversations. In this polished ecosystem, every detail was designed to reinforce a sense of effortless superiority. Dr. Bella Washington, however, was an anomaly. She sat in a plush armchair, not with a sleek tablet or a designer handbag, but with a worn paperback novel and a simple canvas tote. Her attire was neat and professional, a simple grey pantsuit, but it lacked the ostentatious branding that adorned most of the lounge's occupants. She looked less like a first-class passenger and more like a university professor who had wandered into the wrong room. But the most glaringly out-of-place object was the suitcase resting by her feet. It was a large, hard-shelled Samsonite from the late 1980s, a deep burgundy color that had faded to a dull maroon in places. Its surface was a road map of a life well-traveled, covered in a constellation of scratches, dents, and the ghostly residue of old airline stickers. One corner was held together by a strip of silver duct tape, applied with a neat, practical precision. The brass latches, though tarnished, were still functional, a testament to an era when things were built to last. To Bella, that suitcase was more valuable than anything else in the room. It had belonged to her father, a man who worked 2 jobs his entire life, so his daughter could get the education he never had. He was a porter for a different airline, a man who respected the luggage he carried for others, because he understood that each bag contained a piece of someone's life, their hopes, their memories. He had given her the suitcase when she left for her doctorate program. "Don't ever be ashamed of where you come from, Bella," he'd said, his calloused hand resting on the sturdy shell. "This old box has more integrity than a lot of fancy new bags, just like people." Now, years after his passing, the suitcase was her touchstone. It had accompanied her to boardrooms in Tokyo, academic conferences in Berlin, and now, on this seemingly routine flight from New York to London. It reminded her of her mission, of the very reason she had taken this job. Her official title was Head of the Global Passenger Experience and Ethics Division for Aeroverse Holdings, the colossal parent corporation that owned Orion Air and 5 other international carriers. Unofficially, her role was to be the company's ghost. She traveled undercover, a secret shopper with immense power, auditing everything from the cleanliness of the lavatories to the authenticity of the smiles on the cabin crew's faces. Today was the final leg of her 3-month audit of Orion Air, and this flight, OA-112, was the capstone. Her eyes scanned the lounge, observing. She noted the bartender who avoided eye contact with a passenger he deemed less important, the gate agent who sighed dramatically when an elderly couple asked a question, the small, almost imperceptible moments where the veneer of premium service cracked. These were the data points she collected, the subtle tells of a corporate culture in need of correction. It was then that she first saw her. Katerina Petrov was the purser for today's flight, and she moved through the lounge not like an employee, but like a visiting monarch. Her uniform was impeccably tailored, her blonde hair was swept into a flawless chignon, and her smile was a weapon deployed with strategic precision. She radiated an aura of untouchable authority, her posture ramrod straight, her walk a confident glide. She exchanged air kisses with a wealthy-looking man dripping in gold jewelry and laughed a tinkling, practiced laugh with a woman whose handbag probably cost more than a small car. Katerina's gaze swept the room, appraising and categorizing every passenger. When her eyes landed on Bella and her suitcase, they paused for a fraction of a second too long. Her perfectly sculpted lips tightened into a faint, almost invisible sneer. It was a micro-expression, the kind Bella was trained to spot. In that fleeting moment, a judgment was made, a narrative was written. Bella felt the shift in the room's atmosphere as Katerina approached the gate desk. The purser leaned in and whispered something to the gate agent, a young man named Ben. Ben glanced over at Bella, his expression momentarily startled, before he gave a slight, deferential nod to Katerina. The purser smiled, a cold, satisfied little smile, and then turned her attention back to her elite passengers. Bella closed her book, a knot tightening in her stomach. It wasn't anger or indignation she felt, not yet. It was a familiar, weary disappointment. She had seen this look 1,000 times before, in boardrooms where she was the only woman, in academic circles where she was the only person of color, and now, here, in a first-class lounge, where her father's old suitcase marked her as an outsider. She ran a hand over the scuffed surface of the Samsonite, feeling the familiar ridges and dents beneath her fingertips. Her father's words echoed in her mind. More integrity than a lot of fancy new bags. The boarding announcement for flight OA112 to London. Heathrow crackled through the speakers. Bella stood up, took a deep breath, and gripped the handle of her suitcase. It felt solid and reassuring in her hand. The audit, she suspected, was about to become far more interesting. She walked towards the gate, a silent, unassuming woman pulling a piece of her history behind her, heading straight into a storm she could see brewing on the horizon. The priority boarding lane was a parade of quiet confidence and expensive carry-ons. Roller bags with silent, gliding wheels whispered across the polished floor. Leather duffels, smelling of wealth, were slung casually over tailored shoulders. Bella and her burgundy Samsonite were a stark contrast. The suitcase's older, harder plastic wheels made a distinct, rumbling sound against the floor, a working-class sound in a white-collar world. As she approached the jet bridge entrance, Katerina Petrov was there, standing beside the gate agent, Ben. She was greeting passengers by name, checking boarding passes with a practiced, charming efficiency that was both warm and utterly impersonal. Mr. Davenport, wonderful to have you with us again. Your usual seat, 2A. Mrs. Albright, let me know if you need another pillow. We have the silk ones you prefer. Then it was Bella's turn. She handed her boarding pass to Ben, who scanned it with a professional nod. But as she moved to step onto the jet bridge, Katerina took a half step forward, physically blocking her path. The purser's smile was still in place, but it didn't reach her cold, blue eyes. "One moment," Katerina said, her voice loud enough for the passengers behind Bella to hear clearly. She gestured towards the old suitcase. "I'm afraid we might need to check that. It looks rather delicate." The word delicate was coated in a thick layer of condescension. It was meant to mean shabby, unfit, unworthy. Bella maintained her composure. "It's quite sturdy, thank you, and it's standard carry-on size." Katerina's eyes did a slow, deliberate crawl from Bella's simple shoes up to her face, a dismissive appraisal that was a performance for the assembling audience. "It's not about the size, madam. It's about safety. With a case that, vintage, the latches could burst open during takeoff. We wouldn't want your personal effects scattered all over the first-class cabin, would we?" Several passengers in the queue behind them snickered. A man in a crisp suit smirked openly. Bella could feel their eyes on her father's suitcase. She was being turned into a spectacle, a piece of live entertainment for the affluent. "The latches are perfectly secure," Bella stated, her voice even and calm. She refused to give Katerina the satisfaction of a reaction. "I've flown with it hundreds of times." "Perhaps on other airlines," Katerina retorted, the implication hanging poisonously in the air. "Airlines that aren't as exclusive as ours." She turned to Ben, the gate agent. "Could you please tag this for the hold? We can't risk it." Ben looked deeply uncomfortable. He glanced from his superior's flinty gaze to Bella's calm but firm expression. It does meet the carry-on requirements, Katerina," he mumbled, his voice barely a whisper. Katerina shot him a look that could freeze water. "I am the purser on this flight, Benjamin. My responsibility is the safety and comfort of my passengers. That thing," she said, flicking her wrist disdainfully towards the suitcase, "is a potential hazard. Now tag it." Defeated, Ben fumbled for a gate check tag, but Bella didn't move. "I would prefer to keep my luggage with me," she said, her voice dropping slightly, gaining a new edge of steel. "Forcing me to check it is against Orion Air's stated carry-on policy." She was quoting from the employee handbook, from a policy she herself had rewritten 3 months ago. Katerina let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Oh, you're an expert on our policies now, are you?" She leaned in, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial, yet still audible whisper. "Listen, honey. This is the first-class cabin, not a Greyhound bus. We have standards. That piece of junk belongs in the cargo hold with the rest of the general cargo. Now, are you going to comply, or are you going to hold up the entire boarding process for everyone?" The humiliation was complete. She had been called honey. Her father's suitcase, her connection to his memory and his integrity, had been called junk. And she had been publicly framed as an unreasonable person causing a scene. Behind her, a passenger grumbled, "For heaven's sake, just check the damn bag." Bella knew she had a choice. She could escalate here, at the gate. She could pull out her Aeroverse Holdings ID and bring this entire charade to a crashing halt. But that would end the audit. It would be a single, explosive event. But it wouldn't reveal the deeper rot she suspected was present. A purser this brazen, this comfortable with public cruelty, was not an isolated case. She was a symptom of a culture that tolerated or even encouraged such behavior. To fix the disease, she had to observe it in its natural habitat. With a slow, deliberate nod, Bella acquiesced. "Fine," she said softly. "You may check it." A triumphant smirk flashed across Katerina's face. She had won. She had put the woman with the cheap suitcase in her place. Ben, his face flushed with shame, nervously attached the tag to the handle. He couldn't meet Bella's eyes. "Thank you for your cooperation," Katerina said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Now please, proceed to your seat." 4D. She said the seat number as if it were a final insult, a reminder that even in first class, Bella was in a less desirable middle seat. Bella walked down the jet bridge, the rumbling sound of her suitcase now gone, replaced by a hollow silence. She could feel the stares of the other passengers on her back. They saw a woman who had been put in her place. They had no idea they had just witnessed the first tremor of an earthquake that was about to tear their comfortable, arrogant world apart. Bella found her seat, settled in, and took out a small, discreet notebook. She began to write, her pen flying across the page. Every detail was recorded: the time, the location, the exact words used, the names of the employees involved, the reactions of the passengers. The audit was no longer routine. It was now personal. The atmosphere inside the first-class cabin of the Boeing 717 was a bubble of manufactured serenity. The lighting was soft, the seats were pods of privacy and comfort, and the gentle hum of the engines was a lullaby for the privileged. For Bella, however, the cabin felt like a laboratory, and she was observing a specimen of corporate culture at its most toxic. Katerina Petrov was in her element. She commanded the cabin with the theatrical grace of a stage actress, her every move polished and performative. Her attention was a currency she distributed only to those she deemed worthy. She laughed at the jokes of the man in 2A, Mr. Davenport, and personally fluffed the pillow of Mrs. Albright in 3F. She moved with an economy of motion that suggested years of practice, a ballet of service that was, Bella noted, entirely superficial. Bella's presence, however, was treated as an inconvenient truth. While other passengers were offered pre-departure champagne with a warm smile, a junior flight attendant, a young man named Liam, was dispatched to Bella. He approached her hesitantly. "Ma'am, can I get you something to drink? Orange juice? Water? Champagne?" he asked, his voice polite, but his eyes betraying a nervous energy. He had witnessed the scene at the gate. "Water would be lovely, thank you," Bella replied with a small, appreciative smile. She saw the flicker of relief in his eyes. He was young, probably new, and caught in the gravitational pull of his senior officer's prejudice. He was another data point. As the plane reached cruising altitude, the full service began. Katerina pushed the trolley down the aisle, her commentary a running monologue of exclusivity. "For our mains today, we have a pan-seared Chilean sea bass, or a filet mignon with a truffle reduction. The wine pairing for the filet is a rather lovely Bordeaux." When she reached Bella's row, her smile faltered for a second. "And for you?" she asked, her tone clipped, as if taking Bella's order was a chore. "The sea bass, please," Bella said. "And to drink?" "Just water is fine." Katerina raised a perfectly plucked eyebrow. "No wine? The Bordeaux is a 2016 vintage, quite exceptional." It wasn't an offer, it was a test of class, of taste, of belonging. "No, thank you. Water will be perfect," Bella reiterated calmly. Katerina shrugged, a small, dismissive gesture, and served the meal. As she placed the tray on Bella's table, her hand slipped. A glass of ice water tipped over, sending a cascade of frigid water and ice cubes directly onto Bella's grey pantsuit. "Oh my goodness!" Katerina exclaimed, her voice thick with feigned horror. "I am so terribly clumsy. Look at this mess." The apology was loud, drawing the attention of the surrounding passengers, but her eyes held a spark of malicious satisfaction. The accident was a punishment, another little show of dominance. Bella looked down at her soaked lap, the cold water seeping through the fabric. She felt a flash of hot anger, the first she had allowed herself to feel. It would have been so easy to unleash it, to demand the captain to let the carefully constructed dam of her composure break. But she held it in. An outburst would make her the angry black woman, a stereotype she refused to fulfill. It would discredit her findings. "It's all right," Bella said, her voice tight but controlled, as she grabbed a napkin to blot the water. "Accidents happen." "Let me get you some towels," Katerina said, already turning away, her concern evaporating as quickly as it had appeared. Liam, who had been serving the row behind, rushed over with a handful of cloth napkins, his face a mask of genuine apology. "Ma'am, I am so sorry," he whispered, his eyes wide with dismay. "Let me help you." "Thank you, Liam. It's just water," Bella assured him, appreciating his sincere concern. "Katerina can be a bit rushed sometimes," he offered, a weak excuse for his superior's behavior. "I see," Bella said, her eyes meeting his. In that moment, an unspoken understanding passed between them. He knew it wasn't an accident, and he knew it was wrong. For the next 4 hours, the pattern continued. Bella's requests for a blanket were ignored twice before Liam finally brought her one. Her reading light seemed to be the only one on the fritz, and Katerina's inspection of it was a perfunctory glance, followed by a shrug. It was a masterclass in passive aggression, a series of deliberate slights designed to make her feel invisible and unwelcome. Bella documented it all. The time of the spill, the feigned apology, the lack of follow-up, Liam's attempts to mitigate the damage, the other passengers, cocooned in their noise-cancelling headphones and glasses of expensive wine, were either oblivious or chose to be. They were complicit in their silence. She wasn't just auditing an airline anymore. She was witnessing a case study in workplace bullying and discrimination, perpetuated by a senior employee who felt untouchable and enabled by a system that either didn't see or didn't care. As the flight began its descent towards London, Katerina made her final rounds, collecting trash and preparing the cabin for landing. She was smiling again, her good mood apparently restored now that the ordeal of having to serve the woman in 4D was almost over. She was already basking in the glow of a job well done, of a boundary successfully enforced. Bella watched her, her face an unreadable mask. The data was collected, the hypothesis was proven, the time for observation was over. The time for action was approaching as quickly as the green fields of England visible through the window. Katerina Petrov, cruising at 35,000 feet, believed she was at the pinnacle of her career. She had no idea she was already in a free fall. The telltale chime echoed through the cabin, followed by the captain's smooth voice announcing their initial descent into London Heathrow. The flight was nearly over. For most passengers, this was a time to stow laptops and gather belongings. For Bella Washington, it was time to set the final act in motion. She watched as Katerina moved through the cabin, her earlier hostility replaced by a saccharine-sweet farewell persona. She was a different person now, the gracious hostess seeing her esteemed guests to the door. "Mr. Davenport, it was such a pleasure. We do hope you'll fly Orion Air again soon. Mrs. Albright, have a wonderful time in London. Your car service should be waiting." When she passed Bella's row, she didn't make eye contact. She simply reached over to collect an empty plastic cup from the seat next to Bella, a final, silent dismissal. Bella chose her moment perfectly. Just as Katerina was about to move on, she spoke, her voice calm and clear, but with an unmistakable undertone of authority that cut through the cabin's ambient noise. "Miss Petrov." Katerina stopped, her back still to Bella. She turned slowly, her face a carefully constructed mask of polite inquiry, though a flicker of annoyance danced in her eyes. "Yes? I'll need your full name, and the full names of your cabin crew for my report," Bella said. It wasn't a request. Katerina's mask slipped. A small, incredulous laugh escaped her lips. "Your report? Are you planning on writing to customer service about the water spill? I can assure you, I already filed an incident report. My apologies have been noted." "I'm sure they have," Bella replied evenly. "Nevertheless, I require the names. Yours, and that of the junior attendant, Liam. I believe his last name is Connolly." Bella had glanced at his name badge earlier, The mention of Liam's full name seemed to unnerve Katerina slightly. This passenger was more observant than she had assumed. Still, she scoffed. "We don't give out our full names for privacy reasons. You can simply refer to me as Katerina, the purser on flight OA 112. I'm sure they'll know who you mean." She turned to leave. The matter closed in her mind. "I see," Bella said to her retreating back. "Then I'll have to get them another way." Bella reached into her canvas tote bag and pulled out her satellite phone. It was a standard piece of equipment for senior Aeroverse executives, ensuring they were always reachable, even at 30,000 feet. The other passengers, busy with their own preparations for landing, paid her no mind. She dialed a number from memory. It rang twice before a man with a crisp, formal British accent answered. "Shaw's office." "This is Dr. Washington," Bella said, her voice low but firm. "Put him on. Use the Nightingale override." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line, then a frantic, muffled, "Yes, ma'am, right away." The name Nightingale was a high-level code, a ghost key that unlocked any door within the Aeroverse corporate structure. It was the name of her covert audit program. A moment later, a new voice came on the line, flustered and anxious. "Bella, my God, what is it? Is something wrong with the plane?" It was Geoffrey Shaw, the CEO of Orion Air, a man who reported directly to the Aeroverse board and to Bella's division. "The plane is fine, Geoffrey," Bella said, her eyes fixed on Katerina, who was now chattering away with the passengers in the front row, blissfully unaware. "The service, however, is not. I'm on OA 112, about to land at Heathrow." "OA 112? That's our flagship New York route," Shaw said, a note of pride in his voice. "We put our best crew on that flight." "Is Katerina Petrov considered your best, Geoffrey?" Bella asked, her voice laced with ice. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. She heard the frantic sound of keyboard clacking as he, or his assistant, scrambled to pull up the flight's crew manifest. "Yes," Shaw finally said, his voice now strained. "She's one of our most senior pursers, a 20-year veteran." "Why?" "Her 20-year career has just reached its terminus," Bella stated flatly. "I want you to call Robert Chen, your head of in-flight services at Heathrow. I want him on the jet bridge when we dock. Not in the terminal, not in his office. On the jet bridge itself. He is not to let a single passenger off this plane until he has identified me. Is that clear?" "Bella, what in God's name happened?" Shaw's voice was a mixture of panic and confusion. "That's what my full report will detail," Bella said. "For now, just know that your best purser has spent the last 7 hours systematically violating Orion Air's Code of Conduct, Chapters 3, 7, and 9, specifically the sections on passenger dignity, inclusivity, and professional integrity. Sections, I might add, that your airline signed off on 6 months ago." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "Tell Robert to expect me. And tell him that Project Nightingale's preliminary findings for Orion Air are deeply, deeply disappointing. I'll be in touch." She ended the call without waiting for a reply. She slipped the phone back into her bag, just as the plane's wheels touched down on the runway with a gentle bump. The final phase of the audit had begun. Up at the front of the cabin, Katerina Petrov was smiling, preparing to bid farewell to her passengers, completely oblivious to the fact that her own CEO was, at that very moment, frantically burning up the phone lines to Heathrow, trying to stop an avalanche that she herself had started with a single, contemptuous sneer at a battered burgundy suitcase. The taxi to the gate seemed to take an eternity. Through the window, the sprawling complexity of Heathrow bustled with activity, ground crews swarming planes like ants, baggage carts snaking across the tarmac, other jets landing and taking off in a constant, roaring dance. Inside the cabin, however, a strange stillness was about to descend. The fasten seatbelt sign pinged off. The familiar sounds of deplaning began, the click of unbuckling seatbelts, the rustle of jackets being retrieved, the low murmur of conversations as people gathered their belongings. Passengers in the front rows, including Mr. Davenport and Mrs. Albright, were already standing, eager to be the first off. Katerina stood at the open cabin door, her farewell smile firmly in place, ready to perform the final act of her service. She waited for the jet bridge to connect, for the ground staff to give the all clear. But the all clear never came. Instead of the usual hum and gentle bump of the jet bridge docking, there was silence. Seconds stretched into a minute. The passengers began to grumble impatiently. "What's the hold-up?" Mr. Davenport asked, his voice sharp with irritation. Katerina's professional smile wavered. This was a breach of protocol. A delay on the ground reflected poorly on her. "I'm not sure, sir," she said, peering through the small porthole in the door. "There seems to be some activity on the jet bridge. Please, everyone, remain seated for just another moment." Through the window, Bella could see them. A small group of people in dark suits, their faces grim, were walking briskly down the enclosed walkway. At their lead was a man whose panicked expression was visible even from a distance. Bella recognized him from corporate presentations. Robert Chen, Orion Air's head of in-flight services for the entire Europe, Middle East, and Africa region. A very important man who should have been in a board meeting, not on a jet bridge. A sharp, authoritative knock sounded on the cabin door. Katerina, her confusion now mixed with apprehension, opened it. Robert Chen stood there, flanked by 2 airport security officials and a junior airline manager who was holding a tablet computer. Chen's face was pale, and his eyes darted nervously around the first-class cabin, bypassing the eager-to-depart passengers in the front row. "Katerina," he said, his voice a tense whisper. "What happened on this flight?" Katerina was stunned. Her boss, a man she hadn't spoken to directly in months, was on her plane, demanding answers before the passengers had even disembarked. "Mr. Chen?" "Nothing. It was a perfectly smooth flight. We landed a few minutes ahead of schedule." Chen's eyes continued to scan the cabin, a frantic search in his gaze. He looked at the manifest on the tablet his aide was holding, then back at the passengers. His eyes settled on Bella, still seated calmly in 4D. He saw a plainly dressed black woman who didn't fit the typical first-class demographic. His mind, conditioned by the same biases as Katerina's, failed to make the connection. "Where is she?" he hissed at Katerina. "Where is Dr. Washington?" Katerina's blood ran cold. The name meant nothing to her, but the sheer panic in her superior's voice was terrifying. "Dr. Washington, I don't know. Let me check the manifest," she stammered, her composure finally shattering. It was then that Bella unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. "There's no need for that, Mr. Chen," she said, her voice cutting through the confused murmurs of the cabin. "I am Dr. Bella Washington." Every head in the cabin swiveled towards her. Robert Chen looked as if he had seen a ghost. His eyes widened, his jaw went slack, and the color drained completely from his face. He looked from Bella's simple grey pantsuit to the name on the tablet, then back to her. The pieces clicked into place with an audible, catastrophic crash. He practically stumbled down the aisle, his entourage scrambling behind him. He stopped in front of her, his posture no longer that of a powerful executive, but of a supplicant before a queen. "Dr. Washington," he breathed, his voice trembling. "On behalf of Orion Air, we had no idea. Please accept my sincerest apologies." Bella's expression remained neutral. "Apologies are premature, Mr. Chen. We haven't had the debriefing yet." The other passengers were watching this drama unfold with a mixture of shock and utter confusion. Who was this woman? Why was this powerful executive groveling at her feet? But no one was more thunderstruck than Katerina Petrov. She stood frozen by the cabin door, her mind struggling to process the scene. The woman with the cheap suitcase, the woman she had mocked, humiliated, and deliberately tormented for 7 hours. Dr. Washington. The name now echoed in her memory from a dozen corporate memos about a new, shadowy passenger experience division from the parent company. A division with unlimited authority to audit and implement changes. An entity everyone was terrified of. The penny didn't just drop, it crashed through the floor. She looked at Bella, who now met her gaze from across the cabin. There was no triumph in Bella's eyes, no hint of, "I told you so." There was only the cold, hard glint of professional assessment. In that moment, Katerina understood that she hadn't just insulted a passenger. She had insulted the architect of her own rule book, the very person who held the power to sign off on the standards she had so arrogantly flouted. "Mr. Chen," Bella continued, her voice resonating through the silent cabin. "Please ask the other passengers to remain seated for a few more minutes. We have a staffing issue to resolve before anyone can deplane." The words "staffing issue" hung in the air like a death sentence. Katerina felt her knees go weak. The high-flying career she had built over 2 decades had just hit immovable, invisible turbulence. And she was about to be grounded. Permanently. The first-class cabin, once a sanctuary of quiet luxury, had transformed into a courtroom. The passengers were the stunned jury, Robert Chen was the flustered, desperate defense attorney, and Dr. Bella Washington was the prosecutor, judge, and executioner, all rolled into one. Katerina Petrov stood in the aisle, the blood pounding in her ears. Her world had tilted on its axis. The power dynamics she had so carefully navigated her entire life had been inverted with a single sentence. The woman she had deemed worthless was, it turned out, the one who determined her worth to the company. "Dr. Washington, perhaps we could discuss this in a more private setting," Chen pleaded, gesturing vaguely towards the jet bridge. "The lounge, my office." "No," Bella stated, her voice leaving no room for argument. "This began in public, and it will be addressed in public. The passengers on this flight were witness to the substandard level of service. They deserve to witness the resolution." She turned her attention to Katerina, who seemed to shrink under her gaze. Bella's voice was devoid of anger. It was something far more terrifying. It was the dispassionate, precise voice of an auditor delivering findings. "Ms. Petrov," Bella began, "at 0917 Eastern Standard Time, at Gate C64 at JFK, you publicly berated me and misrepresented company policy regarding my carry-on luggage. You used condescending language, including the term honey, and referred to my personal property as junk. This is a violation of the Orion Air Code of Conduct, Chapter 3, Section A, Maintaining Passenger Dignity." Katerina opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Bella continued, her recall absolute. "At approximately 14:30 Greenwich Mean Time, over the North Atlantic, you deliberately spilled a glass of ice water on me and offered a perfunctory, insincere apology, a clear act of passive aggression. This is a violation of Chapter 7, Section C, Professional Integrity and Conduct. Furthermore, you repeatedly ignored my requests for service while attending to other passengers, a violation of Chapter 9, Section B, Equitable and Unbiased Service." She paused, letting the charges settle in the silent cabin. Mr. Davenport, who had snickered at the gate, was now staring at his shoes. Mrs. Albright looked horrified. It was an accident," Katerina finally managed to choke out, her voice a pathetic whisper. "The luggage. I was concerned about safety." "Were you concerned about safety, Miss Petrov?" Bella countered, her voice sharp for the first time. "Or were you making a snap judgment based on my appearance and the perceived value of my belongings? A judgment rooted in a bias that this airline, that Aeroverse Holdings, spends millions of dollars a year trying to eradicate." She then turned her gaze to the junior flight attendant, Liam, who was standing near the galley, looking like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. "Mr. Connolly," Bella said, her tone softening considerably. Liam flinched as if struck. "Yes, ma'am?" "You, on the other hand, upheld your duties with professionalism and empathy," Bella stated. "You attempted to de-escalate the situation at the gate. You showed genuine concern after the spill. You fulfilled requests your superior ignored. You, Mr. Connolly, represent the standard that Orion Air claims to aspire to. Your conduct has been noted." Liam looked at her, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and profound relief. Bella turned her attention back to the quivering purser. "The purpose of Project Nightingale is not to punish Miss Petrov. It is to identify systemic failures. And what I witnessed today was a complete failure of leadership, professionalism, and basic human decency, all embodied in you. You create a toxic work environment for your junior crew and a hostile environment for passengers you deem unworthy. You are not an asset to this airline. You are a liability." The finality in her voice was absolute. Robert Chen, seeing his career flashing before his eyes, knew what he had to do. "Katerina," he said, his voice strained but firm, "you are suspended, effective immediately. Hand over your company ID and badge. You will be escorted from the aircraft. A full investigation will follow. But I think we both know its conclusion." Katerina stared at him in disbelief, her face crumbling. "Suspended? Robert, I have 20 years with this airline. 20 years. And you have undone it all in 7 hours," Bella said quietly. 2 airport security officers stepped forward. Katerina looked wildly around the cabin, at the faces of the passengers she had so eagerly served, as if looking for an ally. She found none. There was only pity, shock, and a kind of dawning horror. Her composure finally broke. A sob escaped her lips as she fumbled to unclip her ID badge from her immaculate uniform. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely manage it. She handed it to Chen, her face a mask of utter devastation. The Queen had been deposed in her own court. As the security officers led a sobbing Katerina off the plane and down the jet bridge, a stunned silence remained. The karma was not a distant concept. It was a swift, brutal, and public reckoning. Bella then addressed the shell-shocked passengers. "My apologies for the delay. Mr. Chen will now allow you to deplane. Thank you for your patience." She walked to the front of the plane, where her father's suitcase was waiting, brought up from the hold on Chen's frantic orders. It looked solid, dignified, and completely unashamed. Bella took the handle. As she walked off the plane, she paused beside Liam. "You handled yourself well under pressure, Mr. Connolly," she said softly. "There's a place for people like you in the future of this company." Then she stepped onto the jet bridge, leaving behind the wreckage of a career and a cabin full of people who had just received a master class in the fact that you can never, ever judge a person by the suitcase they carry. The story of Flight OA-112 did not simply fade away with the news cycle of the following day. Instead, it seeped into the very marrow of the airline, becoming a modern fable whispered in the hushed confines of crew galleys at 35,000 feet and recounted over bitter coffee in airport break rooms from Singapore to San Francisco. It was given names: the Nightingale flight, the judgment at Heathrow, or most commonly, the Burgundy Samsonite incident. New hires would hear it from seasoned veterans, a chilling ghost story about the day a 20-year purser vanished from the company roster, erased as if she had never existed. The legend served as a potent, terrifying reminder that any passenger, on any flight, could be the one who held the entire company's fate in their hands. For Katerina Petrov, the reality was far less legendary. It was a brutal and sterile unraveling. Her suspension, enacted in the humiliating theater of the first-class cabin, bled into a termination delivered via a cold, two-sentence email from Human Resources. The full investigation was a clinical autopsy of her career. Bella's team, with surgical precision, unearthed a history of minor passenger complaints that had been dismissed as trivial, and internal peer reviews that hinted at her abrasive leadership style, all previously ignored in favor of her seniority. Passengers from OA 112, now contacted by the executive office, came forward with their own accounts, their memories suddenly sharpened by the dramatic conclusion of their flight. Mr. Davenport, in particular, wrote a lengthy, shame-faced email detailing the purser's unprofessional conduct at the gate. The union's attempt to defend her was half-hearted at best. The union representative, a weary man named David, met her in a soulless airport hotel cafe. "Katerina," he sighed, pushing a folder across the table. "The evidence is overwhelming. They have you on multiple clear-cut violations of the ethics code. A code, I might add, that you signed and completed the training for last year." Her 20 years of service, the shield she had always believed was impenetrable, had become a liability. 20 years of cultivating an attitude that the company was now frantically trying to excise. She was blacklisted, her industry credentials flagged in a shared database that made her unemployable at any reputable international carrier. The woman whose entire identity was woven from the crisp Orion Air uniform and the ephemeral glamour of global travel was now just a woman in a hotel cafe, facing the crushing emptiness of a life permanently grounded by her own arrogance. But for Dr. Bella Washington, the ruin of one woman was a hollow victory. It was merely the removal of a tumor. The underlying disease in the corporate body still needed to be cured. The real work began in the sterile silence of the Orion Air executive boardroom, 48 hours after she landed in London. Geoffrey Shaw, the airline's CEO, sat at the head of a gleaming mahogany table, surrounded by his terrified senior vice presidents. They had all read the preliminary report, a document that dissected the flight with the cold precision of a coroner. When Bella's face appeared on the massive screen at the end of the room, a palpable tension gripped the air. "Your best and brightest crew, Geoffrey," she began, her voice calm and amplified by the room's speakers, carrying an immense weight, was led by an employee who felt not just comfortable but entitled to publicly humiliate a passenger. This wasn't a lapse in judgment. This was a pattern of behavior built on a foundation of arrogance and bias. We've already found corroborating evidence. It seems Ms. Petrov was not having a bad day. She was having a typical day. She let that statement hang in the air. The most dangerous part is not what she did, but that she believed she could do it with impunity. That belief, gentlemen, came from you. It came from a corporate culture that has, for years, valued seniority over substance and superficial charm over genuine respect. The fact that she felt so secure means your culture is, at best, permissive of such toxicity, and, at worst, actively encourages it. You are not running an airline. You are managing a private club with wings, and your staff have learned to be the gatekeepers. A revolution, quiet but absolute, was set in motion. It was called the Nightingale Initiative. Under Bella's direct oversight, a mandatory top-to-bottom retraining program was designed and rolled out for all 15,000 of Orion Air's cabin crew and ground staff. This was no perfunctory online module. It was an intensive 2-day empathy and ethics course. Bella brought in psychologists and hospitality experts to build a curriculum that included implicit bias testing and difficult role-playing scenarios. One of the core exercises was a simulation of the Burgundy Samsonite incident, forcing crew members to navigate the situation from every perspective: the purser, the junior attendant, and the passenger. Liam Connolly, the junior flight attendant from OA 112, received a personal call from Dr. Washington a week after the flight. He was certain it was to finalize his witness statement, perhaps even to reprimand him for not being more forceful. Instead, Bella offered him a position as a lead instructor for the new initiative. I don't know, ma'am," he stammered, overwhelmed. I didn't do much." "You did everything, Mr. Connolly." Bella's voice came back, firm but kind. "You chose decency when your superior chose cruelty. You demonstrated the core principle of your job. That makes you more qualified to teach it than any 20-year veteran who has forgotten why they do it. I don't need a hero. I need a compass. And yours points true." Liam accepted. He blossomed in the role, his quiet earnestness cutting through the cynicism of even the most jaded senior crew. He stood before them not as a paragon, but as a colleague who had been in the trenches and made the right, simple choice. He taught them that service wasn't about enforcing standards on others, but about upholding the standard within oneself. The initiative was not without its internal resistance. Some veteran crews grumbled about the Nightingale nonsense, but their complaints were silenced by the new reality. Performance bonuses and promotions were now intrinsically linked to the principles taught in the course. A new anonymous feedback channel, reporting directly to Bella's division at Aeroverse, was created, ensuring that another Katerina Petrov could never again be allowed to fester in the system, protected by seniority. Months later, Bella stood in the bustling terminal at Chicago O'Hare, preparing for an audit of another airline in the conglomerate. Her father's faithful burgundy suitcase stood by her side. As she waited, a young Orion Air gate agent, wearing a newly designed name badge that included the phrase "Proud to Serve," a small touch from the Nightingale Initiative, smiled at her as she processed another passenger. When Bella's turn came, the agent's eyes fell to the Samsonite. "I love your suitcase, Mom," the agent said, her smile unforced and genuine. "It looks like it has some amazing stories to tell." For a moment, Bella was taken aback. This simple, unsolicited act of kindness was more than just good customer service. It was a data point, a green shoot of change growing in what was once a barren field. It was proof that the culture was, slowly but surely, beginning to shift. She thought of her father, a porter who spent his life handling other people's luggage with care. He would have liked this young woman. Bella looked down at the scuffed, taped, and utterly dignified case, and then back at the agent. A real, warm smile spread across her face, a smile free from the weight of her audit. "It does," she said, her voice softer than usual. "It really, really does." She walked down the jet bridge, the suitcase rumbling softly behind her on its old, sturdy wheels. The sound was no longer an announcement of difference, but a familiar rhythm. It was the sound of integrity, of history, and of a quiet, profound change rippling through the skies, a promise kept to her father's memory. One respectful employee, one flight at a time. The true karma, she knew, was not found in a single person's downfall, but in the systemic redemption that lifted thousands of others to a higher, kinder standard. The story of Dr. Bella Washington and Katerina Petrov isn't just about a single flight. It's a powerful reminder that dignity is not determined by the luggage we carry, but by the character we possess. It shows that true power isn't loud and arrogant, but quiet, observant, and decisive. Karma in this story wasn't a mystical force. It was a direct consequence of actions, a professional reckoning for a deep personal failing. It reminds us that behind every uniform is a person, and behind every passenger is a story deserving of respect. If this story resonated with you, and you believe that kindness and decency should be the standard, not the exception, please hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories where karma delivers the final, unforgettable verdict. Thank you for listening.